I stumbled out of my car, bone-tired after a 12-hour shift, the weight of the day pressing down on me like a lead blanket, only to find my garage door blocked yet again by that sleek white SUV. Corinne's car, the same one I'd warned her about a dozen times. Rain poured in sheets, soaking me as I stood there, my cold dinner congealing on the passenger seat, and I knew exactly who was behind this smug intrusion. My neighbor Corinne, the human equivalent of a migraine. I took a deep breath, trying to talk myself down, clinging to a shred of hope that maybe this was an honest mistake, that she'd be inside her house, ready to move it with an apology. But her place was dark, silent, mocking me with its stillness, and my patience, already frayed from weeks of her antics, snapped like a brittle twig. I marched over and knocked, a hard, deliberate rap that echoed my frustration, and after some shuffling inside, the door swung open. There she stood in pink satin pajamas, a glass of wine in hand, looking like I'd interrupted her spa night. "Oh, it's you," she said, her voice dripping with the enthusiasm of a telemarketer call, and I pointed at her SUV. "Corinne, your car," in my driveway again. She sipped her wine unfazed. "Yeah, I know, I had groceries, I was tired, so I left it. I'll move it in the morning." My brain short-circuited. Her entitlement was a new species of audacity. "No, you're moving it now," I said, my tone sharp enough to cut glass. She blinked like I'd asked her to torch the damn thing. "Jake, don't be so uptight. It's just a car. What's the big deal?" The big deal was this was the 5th time this month. The big deal was I'd given her warnings she ignored. The big deal was I paid a mortgage to park in my own garage, not to play host to her SUV. "You don't own my driveway, Corinne. Move it." She huffed, rolling her eyes so hard I thought they'd stick, muttering, "Fine, but you don't have to be such a jerk about it." Drenched and fuming, I watched her saunter inside, grab her keys at a glacial pace, and finally move the car, only to park it halfway on my lawn instead. Before I could protest, she flashed a condescending smirk and slammed her door shut. I clenched my jaw, knowing this wasn't over, not even close. The next morning proved it. I stepped outside with my coffee to find not just her SUV back in my driveway, but a second car, a guest, both blocking my garage completely. My fingers tightened around the mug. This was no accident, it was a taunt. I stormed over, pounding on her door, but she didn't answer, just yelled from inside, "Busy, try later." Try later, I called the cops, but their response was a gut punch. "It's private property, sir. Unless she's inside your home, we can't do much." My eye twitched. "So she can keep parking here. You could tow it," the officer suggested, and a light bulb flickered on. I dialed a tow company, eager to end this, but as the truck rolled up, Corinne burst out, feigning shock. "Oh my God, Jake, are you seriously towing my car over a tiny parking issue?" "This isn't tiny, Corinne," I growled. "You're blocking my garage." She scoffed, "Relax, I was just about to move it." And with a smug grin, she took her sweet time driving off, leaving me seething but unvictorious. Corinne's slow-motion retreat from my driveway left me standing there, rain-soaked and simmering, the tow truck driver shrugging as he climbed back into his cab. Another battle stalled, not won. I trudged inside, the taste of defeat bitter despite her car being gone, because I knew she'd be back, her smugness a promise of more to come. I needed a real plan, something sharper than yelling or calling cops who couldn't care less. So the next day I installed a security camera, its lens trained on my driveway like a hawk. If she pulled this again, I'd have proof, timestamps, footage, a concrete case. But Corinne, queen of escalation, had other ideas. That evening I dragged myself home after another grueling shift, only to freeze mid-step. Her SUV wasn't just in my driveway, it was inside my garage, parked like she'd claimed squatters' rights. My fists clenched, my blood pressure spiked, and for a moment my vision blurred with raw fury. How the hell had she gotten in there? I stormed next door, skipping the polite knock for a full-on pounding that rattled her frame, and when she opened the door, chewing gum like she was auditioning for indifference, I could barely speak. "You parked in my garage," I said, voice tight as a wire. She shrugged. "Yeah, so you weren't using it." My fingers twitched, itching to throttle something. Her logic was a middle finger to sanity. "That's not how property works, Corinne." She crossed her arms, leaning into her role as neighborhood villain. "Well, if you're so mad, call the cops." "Oh, wait, they won't do anything. Guess you're stuck with me." She was right. The police had already shrugged this off, and tow companies couldn't legally drag a car out of a garage, even mine. She'd found a loophole and was dancing in it, daring me to snap. I stepped back, forcing a deep breath, my mind racing. She thought she'd won, thought I'd roll over, but she'd misjudged me. That night, I sat in my living room, staring at the security footage of her SUV lounging in my garage like a tenant, my anger morphing into a cold, calculated resolve. She'd assumed I was reasonable, that I'd stop at harsh words, but she'd crossed a line I didn't know I had. I spent hours digging through parking laws, trespassing rules, anything I could weaponize, fueled by coffee and spite until a revelation hit: abandoned vehicles. City regs were vague enough. If a car sat on private property without consent for too long, it could be flagged as abandoned, giving the owner a tight window to reclaim it before it was towed or scrapped. I needed an ally, so I called Frank, the junkyard guy I'd met years back over a motorcycle project. He loved a good underdog tale. I laid out the saga, and he laughed so hard I had to pull the phone away, then got serious. "If you've got proof it's there without permission, I can take it legally. Just need a paper trail, make it look abandoned." I spent the next day crafting my trap. A fake tow notice with city-style letterhead citing her repeated violations, and a formal notice of abandonment warning that her car would be disposed of in 24 hours if unmoved. That night I taped it to her door. Either she'd move it, or I'd have my excuse. Predictably, she ignored it, and by morning her SUV still sat smugly in my garage, ripe for the taking. The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon as I stood in my kitchen, coffee in hand, staring at Karen's SUV still parked in my garage. Her ignoring my notice was the green light I'd been waiting for. I called Frank, barely containing the glee in my voice, and within an hour his tow truck rumbled down the street, its hook gleaming like a promise of justice. I watched from my porch as they backed into my driveway, the driver eyeing the setup with a grin, and then they went to work, hooking her car and dragging it out of my garage with a satisfying screech of metal on concrete. It felt like an exorcism, the weight of her entitlement lifting as the SUV rolled away, bound for Frank's junkyard. I sank into my couch with a celebratory mug, savoring the quiet, but it didn't last. Minutes later, a shriek pierced the air, so shrill it could have cracked glass. I didn't rush. I strolled outside, coffee still in hand, to find Karen packing where her car had been, phone clutched like a weapon, her face a mask of panic turning to fury when she saw me. "Where's my car?" she demanded, voice hitting a pitch that scattered birds. I took a slow sip. "Oh, it was towed. There was a notice on your door. You must have missed it." Her mouth flapped fish-like as she processed. "You can't do that. That's my property." I gestured to the empty garage. "And this is my garage. You left it on private property. City regs say abandoned vehicles can be removed." She was already dialing, veins popping in her neck. "I'm calling the police." I nodded. "You should. Maybe they'll explain property laws to you." 2 officers arrived fast, probably expecting a quick nuisance call, and Karen launched into a theatrical rant, painting me as a deranged car thief driven by spite. They turned to me, and I handed over my ace, the notice copies, the abandonment form, and a calm rundown of her parking saga. "It was in my garage without permission," I said. "I followed protocol." The cops skimmed the papers, one raising an eyebrow, the other fighting a smirk. "Ma'am," the first said to Karen, "it looks like notice was given." Her face turned a volcanic red. "But it wasn't abandoned. He knew it was mine," the second officer sighed. "The issue is it was inside his property without consent. This isn't criminal. You'd need to take it up with the tow company." Karen went pale, realization dawning. "Where's my car?" I shrugged. "Junkyard, I think. Better hurry before they strip it." She spun, storming off, dialing furiously, and I leaned against my door frame, victory tasting sweeter than the coffee. Hours later, she was back, banging on my door like a battering ram. I opened it to her, jabbing a finger in my face. "You're going to pay for this," she hissed. "I spoke to my lawyer. I'm suing you." I crossed my arms. "Go ahead. I've got security footage of you trespassing in my garage, and the cops already said it's not criminal. Good luck." Her bravado flickered. She hadn't expected me to be ready, but she doubled down. "I'll get my car back, and when I do, watch yourself." I smiled. "I'll be watching with my cameras." She stormed off, her door slamming so hard my windows rattled, but I stood there unshaken, knowing I'd landed the first real blow in this war she'd started. Karen's retreat left a stillness in its wake, a fragile piece I knew wouldn't hold. She wasn't the type to slink away defeated, not with her ego on the line. I stood in my doorway, the echo of her slamming door fatting, and felt a rush of satisfaction. She'd pushed me too far, and I'd pushed back harder. The security camera hummed above, its footage a shield against whatever she'd throw next, and I settled into the night, replaying the tow truck's triumph in my mind. But Karen didn't disappoint. By morning, she'd taken her war to social media, flooding Facebook with a melodramatic rewrite of events. According to her, I was an unhinged lunatic who'd stolen her car out of jealousy. Jealousy of what? She didn't say, casting herself as a hardworking single woman tormented by a vindictive psycho. She omitted the part where she'd parked in my garage like it was her personal lot, spinning a tale so over the top I almost admired the creativity. Her Karen clone friends swarmed the comments, howling about injustice, urging her to sue, go to the media, even stage a protest. My own neighborhood soap opera starring me as the villain. I should have been worried, but I laughed instead because the tide turned fast. Neighbors chimed in, not buying her act. One mentioned her blocking their driveway too. Another recalled her tantrum over a fence color at an HOA meeting. A third brought up her calling the cops on kids selling lemonade. By noon, her post was a dumpster fire of her own making. She deleted it, but the damage was done. I figured that be it that the public shamming might finally quiet her, but I underestimated her stubbornness. That evening, a sharp knock jolted me from dinner. 2 cops stood on my porch, looking more tired than stern, and my stomach flipped for a second, thinking she'd somehow twisted this into an arrest. "Sir, we need to ask some questions," one said, and I crossed my arms. "Let me guess, Karen," he sighed. "She's claiming you stole her vehicle and had it illegally scrapped." I bit back a laugh. "I didn't steal anything. It was in my garage without permission, and I followed city protocol to remove it." The second cop flipped through a notepad. "You filed an abandonment report?" "Yep, and I've got footage of her parking there, ignoring warnings, refusing to move it. Check it." I led them inside, pulled up the video, Karen's SUV rolling in, her smirking as I begged her to move it, days passing with it untouched. They watched, one rubbing his temple, the other nodding slowly. "Well, this is a mess," the first said. "Technically, the removal's legal. She should have moved it when warned," the second added. "So I'm not arrested?" I asked, smirking. "No," the first said, "but she'll probably try civil court." "She's welcome to," I replied. "She's got no case." They left muttering about paperwork, and I shut the door, grinning. Karen's last card had flopped. For a week she went quiet, no stomping, no glares, just an eerie calm I didn't trust. Then one morning I saw it, a moving truck outside her house. At first I thought it was a delivery, but as workers hauled out furniture and boxes, I stepped outside, catching her eye. "Moving?" I asked, feigning innocence. She huffed. "Not because of you." I raised an eyebrow. "Of course not." She shifted, arms crossed. "This neighborhood's toxic. I need a fresh start." I bit back a laugh, sure that was it. Karen's claim of a fresh start hung in the air like cheap perfume as I watched the moving truck swallow her life piece by piece, couch, lamps, boxes stacked with the chaos of her reign. She stood there, barking at the workers, her glare slicing toward me every few seconds, and I leaned against my porch railing, savoring the sight. "I hope you're happy," she snapped, her voice tight with venom, and I smiled wider than I meant to. "Oh, I am more than you'll ever know." She didn't bite back, just turned on her heel and stomped off to micromanage the loaders, her silence louder than any tantrum she'd thrown before. The truck doors slammed shut, the engine roared, and just like that, she was gone, my street lighter, the air cleaner without her hovering entitlement. I stood there a long minute, letting it sink in. No more blocked driveways, no more smug smirks, no more Karen. To celebrate, I threw a low-key gathering for the neighbors who'd endured her nonsense. Grilled burgers, cold beers, and a shared exhale of relief under the stars. We swapped war stories, her driveway stunts, her HOA meltdowns, the lemonade kid fiasco, laughter rolling through the night like a victory chant. The quiet held for days, my garage finally mine again, until Frank called, his voice crackling with amusement. "Hey, buddy, thought you'd like this. Karen tried to get her car back." I perked up. "Oh. How'd that go?" he chuckled. "Showed up at the junkyard, demanded we return it, but it's already scrapped, dismantled to bits." I whistled low. "Bet she loved that. Went ballistic," he said, "threatened to sue me, the city, everyone. Said she'd ruin my business, then stormed off in a taxi. Funniest thing I've seen in years." I laughed, picturing her flailing in defeat. "Thanks, Frank, you're a legend." "Any time," he said. "Need another car gone, you know who to call." I hung up, shaking my head. It was over, truly over. That night I pulled my car into my garage, the first time in months without a fight, and it felt like a victory lap. Standing there, staring at the empty space where her SUV had squatted, I couldn't help but grin. Some battles you win with patience, some with strategy, and some with a tow truck timed just right. Karen had underestimated me, thought her loopholes and attitude would carry her, but I'd outmaneuvered her at every turn. The security footage, the fake notices, Frank's junkyard hustle, it had all clicked and she'd paid the price. Her moving wasn't just a retreat, it was surrender, her tail tucked after one too many losses. The neighborhood buzzed with her exit, neighbors waved a little friendlier, the street felt wider without her shadow. I didn't need her car's carcass as a trophy, the peace was enough, the silence where her shrieks used to be. She'd come at me with entitlement, banking on my braking, but I'd bent the rules just enough to snap her game in half. As I locked the garage, the night cool against my skin, I thought back to that first rain-soaked standoff, her wine glass, her smirk, her car in my way. I'd been exhausted, ready to snap, but I'd played it smart instead, and now I stood here, king of my own driveway, while she scrambled somewhere else, her kingdom scrapped and sold for parts. The days after Karen's exodus stretched into a blissful quiet, my garage a reclaimed fortress, its door rolling shut each night without a hint of her white SUV lurking inside. The neighborhood settled into a rhythm it hadn't known in months. No more tense glances toward her house, no more bracing for her next petty jab. My security camera kept watch, but its lens caught only the mundane now. Leaves skittering across the driveway, the mailman's quick shuffle, the occasional squirrel darting by. The moving truck's tire tracks faded from her lawn and her place sat empty. A for sale sign stabbed into the dirt like a final punctuation mark on her reign. I'd park my car, step out, and breathe easier, the weight of her nonsense lifted, replaced by a smug satisfaction I didn't bother hiding. Neighbors nodded knowingly when we passed. Her departure was our shared victory, a collective sigh we didn't need to voice. Frank's call about her junkyard meltdown had been the cherry on top, her threats dissolving into the absurdity of a woman screaming at a pile of scrap. I pictured her there, designer shoes sinking into oily gravel, demanding a car that no longer existed, and it cracked me up every time. She'd lost everything, her ride, her leverage, her grip on this street, and I'd orchestrated it with a few well-timed moves. The burger night lingered in memory, our laughter a toast to her absence, and I'd catch myself grinning at random moments, replaying how her own arrogance had fueled her fall. Social media had moved on, her deleted post a forgotten blip, but whispers of her fate trickled back. Someone said she'd rented a cramped apartment downtown. Another swore she'd been spotted haggling at a used car lot, her budget slashed by legal fees and spite. I didn't care enough to dig. She was gone, and that was plenty. My garage became a shrine to the win. Every time I pulled in, it was a reminder of outsmarting her, of turning her loophole into my checkmate. The tow noticed the abandonment form, Frank's gleeful assist. It had been a gamble, but it had paid off cleaner than I'd hoped. The cops' visit had been her last gasp, and their shrugs had sealed it. She had no ground to stand on, no case to fight. I'd bent the rules just shy of breaking them, and she'd crumbled under the weight of her own bluff. The street felt wider now, the air less clogged with her presence, and I'd catch neighbors lingering longer outside, reclaiming space she'd tainted. That for sale sign swayed in the breeze, a beacon of her defeat, and I wondered who'd move in next. Hopefully someone who knew what a driveway was for. Karen had come at me with entitlement as her weapon, banking on my exhaustion, my restraint. But I'd flipped it, used her game against her. The rain-soaked night she'd blocked me first felt distant now, her wine-sipping smugness a faded ghost. I'd been pushed to the edge, ready to lose it, but I'd held steady, played smart, and won more than just my garage back. I'd won the quiet, the control, the right to park where I damn well pleased. As I locked up one evening, the sky bruising purple, I glanced at her empty house and felt the finality sink in. She'd underestimated me, and it had cost her everything while I stood here, king of my own asphalt, her kingdom towed away in pieces. Karen's absence carved a new normal into our street, a peace so tangible I could feel it in the way my shoulders loosened each time I pulled into my garage unhindered. The for sale sign in her yard weathered the weeks, its edges curling as if embarrassed to still be there, while my pasture of a driveway stayed gloriously empty. No SUVs, no guest cars, just the clean sweep of asphalt I'd fought for. The security camera kept its vigil, but its footage was uneventful now, a boring reel of dusk and dawn I rarely checked, proof she'd been banished for good. Neighbors started lingering on sidewalks again, chatting over fences without that unspoken tension she'd sown, and I'd catch their nods, their half-smiles, a quiet alliance forged in her wake. Frank's junkyard tale had spread like wildfire at our burger night, and it had become legend. Corinne's meltdown over a scrapped car the punchline to every retelling, her threats as hollow as the shell she'd left behind. I'd park each night and feel the wind settle deeper, a smug hum in my chest. Her entitlement had been her undoing, and I'd turned it into my triumph with a tow truck and some paperwork. Her old house sat dark, a hollow shell waiting for new life, and I didn't care who'd claim it next, as long as they parked in their own damn space. Whispers of her fate floated back. Someone swore she'd been seen yelling at a tow lot clerk downtown. Another said she'd taken a job at a strip mall, her designer days traded for minimum wage. But I let them drift past, uninterested. She was a ghost now, her war lost, and I'd moved on to savoring the spoils. My garage, my rules, my quiet. The camera's steady blink was my trophy, the tow notice a memento I'd tucked away, Frank's laugh on the phone a medal I didn't need to wear. She pushed me to the brink that rainy night, her wine glass and smirk daring me to crack, but I'd outplayed her, turned her loophole into a noose she'd tied herself. The cops' shrugs had been her last defeat, their tablets showing my footage the nail in her coffin. She'd had no case, no comeback, just a moving truck and a bruised ego. The street breathed easier without her, kids biking past her old place like it had never been a battlefield. And I'd catch myself standing in my driveway, hands on hips, just soaking in the stillness. That first standoff felt like another life, her blocking me, the rain, my cold dinner. But it had sparked something, a resolve I hadn't known I had. I'd bent the system, not broken it, and walked away with more than a clear garage. I'd won the right to not be messed with. As weeks turned to months, her name faded from talk, her posts wreckage a forgotten blip. And I let it go too. Victory didn't need gloating, just the quiet click of my garage door shutting each night. She'd come at me with arrogance, banking on my breaking, but I'd held firm, played smarter, and sent her packing. One evening, locking up under a crisp sky, I glanced at her empty lot and felt the final thread snap. She'd underestimated me, and it had cost her everything while I stood here, king of my own concrete, her reign towed off and scrapped to nothing. Months rolled by, and Corinne's old house finally shed its "for sale" sign. A young couple moving in with a pickup truck and a sensible sedan that stayed firmly in their own driveway. Proof the universe could still deal a fair hand. My garage stood unchallenged, its door rolling open and shut with a rhythm as steady as my pulse. The security camera now just a formality, its lens catching nothing but the seasons shifting. The street had healed fully, her shadow erased by kids on bikes, neighbors grilling in backyards, a quiet hum of life she'd never fit into. I'd park each night, step out, and feel the victory baked into the concrete. Her SUV a distant memory, scrapped and scattered, while I held the keys to my own peace. Frank's call about her junkyard tantrum had become my favorite anecdote, retold over beers with a grin, her threats a punchline that never got old. She'd lost her car, her grip, her throne, and I'd orchestrated it with a few sheets of paper and a well-timed tow. The burger night lingered as a marker, our shared relief a bond that didn't need words, and I'd catch neighbors' waves, their eyes saying what their mouths didn't. Good riddance. Her name barely surfaced now, her social media meltdown a fossil in the neighborhood's memory, though someone swore they'd seen her downtown, haggling over a dented hatchback, fitting if true. I didn't chase the rumors, she was gone, and that was enough, her war lost in a battle of my making. The camera footage sat untouched, the tow notice filed away like a trophy I didn't need to flaunt. My garage was proof enough, its emptiness a testament to outsmarting her. She'd come at me that rainy night, wine glass in hand, her smirk daring me to snap, but I'd turned it around, used her own game to dismantle her. The cops' visit, her last desperate swing, had flopped against my evidence, and the moving truck had hauled off her defeat. The new neighbors waved one evening, friendly and clueless about the saga, and I waved back, the street theirs now, not hers. That first standoff, rain, cold dinner, her blocking me, felt like a lifetime ago, a spark that lit a fire I hadn't known I could stoke. I'd bent the rules, leaned on Frank's junkyard hustle, and won more than a parking spot. I'd reclaimed my space, my sanity, my right to not be pushed. As winter crept in, the air sharp and clean, I locked the garage one night and paused, glancing at her old place, now lit with someone else's life. The wind wasn't loud. It was in the silence, the way my boots hit my driveway without a fight, the way her chaos had been towed off and scrapped to dust. She'd underestimated me, banked on my braking, but I'd played it smart, not loud, and sent her packing with nothing but a taxi and a shredded ego. The camera blinked its last unnecessary frame, the tow truck's echo faded, and I stood there, king of my own asphalt, her kingdom a pile of parts somewhere far off. That night had started with exhaustion, her entitlement a wall I'd crashed against, but it ended with me standing taller, a quiet victor in a war she'd never seen coming. Some battles you win with patience, some with strategy, and some with a tow truck that changes everything.